Victor Romano believed his life was perfectly balanced, like a carefully stacked tower that could never fall. To the outside world, he was a successful and respected businessman, known for his calm voice, sharp suits, and quiet authority. People admired him, feared him, and trusted him all at once. No one saw the hidden side of his life, the deals made in dark rooms, the silent threats, the violence that followed his orders. Victor told himself that he was in control of everything. His money, his power, his emotions, and even the people around him moved according to his will. This belief gave him comfort, and in his mind, it made him untouchable. Grace Romano was once the center of that belief. She was not just his wife, she was the woman who stood by him before success changed his heart. She had met Victor when he was struggling, when his dreams were big but his pockets were empty. She believed in him when no one else did. Grace worked long hours, cooked late dinners, and listened to his worries when fear still lived in his eyes. Back then, Victor needed her strength, and she gave it without asking for anything in return. Their love felt honest and warm, built on shared struggles and quiet promises about a better future. As Victor's power grew, something slowly shifted. His nights became longer, his phone rang more often, and his home felt quieter. He told himself that this distance was temporary, that everything he was doing was for their future. Grace noticed the change but said little. She believed that love meant patience. She believed that one day, Victor would slow down and return to the man she married. Even when he came home late and spoke less, she held on to hope. She reminded herself that every strong man needed someone to carry the emotional weight he could not show to the world. Lily entered Victor's life when he least expected and most desired escape. She was young, lively, and full of admiration. Lily looked at Victor as if he were a hero. Not a man with a past full of mistakes. With her, he did not have to explain anything. She laughed at his jokes, praised his strength, and made him feel powerful in a way that felt easy and effortless. Victor convinced himself that Lily was just a distraction, a harmless comfort that helped him forget the pressure of his double life. He believed he could enjoy this attention without losing what truly mattered. Grace felt Lily's presence before she ever knew her name. She sensed it in Victor's absence, in the way he avoided her eyes, in the silence that filled their home. Still, she chose hope over suspicion. Grace believed that confronting Victor would only push him further away. She focused instead on memories, on the man who once held her hands and promised never to abandon her. She kept their home warm and welcoming, hoping that one day he would feel safe enough to return fully. That evening, the air felt heavy, as if something unseen was pressing down on Grace's chest. She had been feeling tired for weeks, but she ignored it, telling herself it was stress or loneliness. She stood in the living room, looking at old photographs of her and Victor, their smiles frozen in happier times. Her heart ached, not with anger, but with longing. She wanted to hear his voice, to feel that she still mattered. Grace picked up her phone with trembling hands. She hesitated before dialing Victor's number, afraid of being ignored, afraid of confirming the distance she tried so hard not to see. Still, hope pushed her forward. She believed that if he answered, even for a moment, everything would feel lighter. She imagined him apologizing, telling her he would come home early, reminding her that she was still his world. Across the city, Victor was sitting in a luxury restaurant, laughing softly as Lily talked. The lights were warm, the music gentle, and his worries felt far away. In that moment, Victor believed he had mastered life. He believed he could separate love from desire, responsibility from pleasure. He thought he could control time itself, always fixing things later, always choosing comfort now. Grace's phone rang unanswered. She waited, holding the phone close to her chest, whispering his name as if he could hear her through the silence. Hope still lived in her heart, fragile but unbroken. She did not know that this hope was standing at the edge of something irreversible. Victor, confident and distracted, never imagined that the life he thought he controlled was already beginning to slip through his fingers. Victor's phone vibrated softly on the table, a quiet interruption lost beneath the low music and Lily's gentle laughter. He noticed it only for a second, his eyes flicking toward the screen before he turned it face down without reading the name properly. In his mind, whatever waited on the other end could be handled later. At that moment, he wanted peace, not responsibility. He wanted to feel admired, not questioned. Lily was talking about her dreams, her voice full of excitement, her eyes shining as she looked at him like he was the answer to everything she wanted in life. Victor leaned back in his chair, convincing himself that he deserved this calm moment after years of stress and danger. He told himself that nothing truly important would be lost if he ignored one call. Across the city, Grace sat down slowly on the couch, her heart beating faster than it should have. When the call went unanswered, a familiar ache filled her chest, the kind she had learned to hide from herself. She stared at the phone, waiting for it to light up again, telling herself that Victor was probably busy, that he would call back soon. She tried to take a deep breath, but the air felt heavy, as if her lungs could not fully open. A wave of fear washed over her, sharper than anything she had felt before. Still, she clung to hope, reminding herself that love meant understanding, even when it hurt. Victor raised his glass. Smiling as Lily touched his arm, her gesture light and careless. The world around him felt distant, like a scene he could step out of whenever he wanted. He ignored the tight feeling in his chest, the small voice in his mind that urged him to check his phone again. He had spent years training himself to silence guilt. Tonight was no different. He believed that Grace was safe at home, surrounded by comfort, waiting patiently as she always did. That belief allowed him to relax, to stay where he was, choosing the easier feeling over the deeper responsibility he refused to face. Grace stood up again, feeling dizzy, her vision blurring as she tried to walk toward the kitchen. Her hands shook as she dialed Victor's number a second time, this time with urgency replacing hesitation. Her heart pounded painfully, each beat louder than the last, and a quiet panic settled into her bones. She wanted to tell him she wasn't feeling well, that she needed him, not as a powerful man, but as her husband. The phone rang and rang, the sound echoing in the empty house, until it stopped once more without an answer. Tears filled her eyes, not from anger, but from the deep loneliness that had slowly become part of her life. At the restaurant, Victor laughed at something Lily said, his voice relaxed, his posture easy. The phone vibrated again, but this time he pushed it slightly farther away, annoyance flickering across his face. He told himself that Grace would understand later, that there was always time to fix things tomorrow. He had no idea that tomorrow was already slipping away. Lily noticed the brief change in his expression but said nothing, pulling him back into conversation, into a moment that felt warm and uncomplicated. Victor allowed himself to forget everything else, unaware that each second of silence was becoming a weight he would one day never escape. Grace's strength finally gave way. Her legs felt weak, and she sank to the floor, her back against the wall, struggling to breathe. The phone slipped from her hand, sliding across the floor as she pressed her palm against her chest. Memories flooded her mind, Victor's smile when they first met, his promises whispered in quiet rooms, the life they were supposed to grow old in together. She did not think about blame or betrayal. In her final moments of awareness, she only wished he were there, holding her hand, telling her everything would be okay. The ambulance arrived too late. The house that once held warmth and patience now held silence. That same night, Victor returned home hours later, confident, untouched by worry, unaware that the unanswered calls were not just missed moments but the final bridge between him and the woman who had loved him longer than anyone else. As he walked into the quiet house, he believed everything was still under his control, never knowing that pain had already written the next chapter of his life. The knock on the door came early in the morning, sharp and heavy, cutting through the quiet of the house like a warning Victor did not yet understand. He opened the door with irritation still clinging to him from the night before, expecting a guard or a business problem that needed his attention. Instead, two unfamiliar faces stood before him, their expressions serious, their voices careful. As they spoke, the words moved slowly, as if the air itself resisted carrying them. Victor heard fragments at first: hospital, emergency, wife, but his mind refused to connect them into meaning. When the sentence finally settled in his ears, when he understood that Grace was gone, his body reacted before his thoughts did. His knees weakened, his breath caught in his throat, and the world around him lost its shape. For a long moment, Victor simply stared, unable to accept what he was being told. Grace was always there. She waited, she forgave, she endured. In his mind, she was unbreakable, a quiet constant he never had to worry about losing. He laughed once, a hollow sound that shocked even him, and shook his head as if denial alone could undo reality. But when the officers handed him her phone, when he saw the screen lit with his name repeated again and again in missed calls, something inside him cracked. The power he had built, the control he believed in, meant nothing in the face of those unanswered rings. Victor sat alone in the living room as the house filled with a silence heavier than any threat he had ever faced. He replayed the night in his mind, every moment he chose comfort over responsibility, every time he turned away from the small voice urging him to answer. He remembered Lily's laughter, the warmth of the restaurant, the ease of pretending his actions had no consequences. Each memory now felt like a betrayal, not just of Grace, but of the man he once promised to be. For the first time in years, fear reached him without needing violence or weapons. It came quietly, settling deep in his chest. At the hospital, reality became unavoidable. The cold walls, the hushed voices, and the stillness of Grace's body forced Victor to face what he had lost. He stood beside her bed, unable to touch her at first, afraid that doing so would make everything real. Grace looked peaceful, almost as if she were sleeping, but the absence of warmth was undeniable. Victor's hands trembled as he finally reached for hers, realizing too late how often he had pulled away when she needed him most. No amount of money, no network of power, could bring her back or erase the final moments she faced alone. The funeral passed like a blur. Faces appeared, words were spoken, condolences offered, but none of it truly reached him. Victor stood there, surrounded by people yet completely isolated, consumed by the knowledge that the greatest loss of his life came not from an enemy, but from his own neglect. Lily did not come, and he did not look for her. She had already faded into the background. A reminder of a choice that could never be undone. What remained was guilt, heavy and constant, following him with every step. That night, Victor returned to an empty home that no longer felt like a place of rest. He walked through rooms filled with memories he had ignored for too long, touching objects Grace once cared for, hearing echoes of her presence in the silence. The phone sat on the table, dark and quiet, no longer capable of ringing. Victor understood then that power had limits, and control was an illusion he had clung to out of pride. The unanswered calls were not just missed chances, they were the moment his life split into before and after, marking the beginning of a truth he could no longer escape. After Grace's death, Victor Romano discovered that silence could be louder than gunfire. The house no longer felt like a place he owned but a space that judged him with every step he took. Each morning he woke up expecting to hear Grace moving in the kitchen or humming softly as she prepared breakfast, but the quiet greeted him instead, cold and unchanging. For the first time in his life, Victor had nowhere to escape. His power meant nothing when he sat alone at night, staring at the same walls, replaying the sound of his phone vibrating unanswered. Sleep abandoned him, and when it came, it brought nightmares filled with ringing phones and voices he could no longer reach. Victor began to withdraw from his empire without announcing it. Meetings were cancelled, orders were delayed, and trusted men noticed a change in him they could not understand. The same man who once ruled with absolute confidence now seemed distant, distracted, and hollow. Violence no longer excited him, and money no longer comforted him. He started visiting places he had avoided for years, hospitals, shelters, quiet streets where ordinary people lived ordinary lives. Everywhere he went, he saw Grace in different faces, especially in women waiting alone, hoping someone would come for them. Each sight felt like a reminder of what he had failed to be. One evening, while sorting through Grace's belongings, Victor found her old notebooks hidden in a drawer. At first, he hesitated to open them, afraid of what he might find. When he finally did, the words cut deeper than any weapon ever had. Grace had written about loneliness, about missing the man Victor used to be, about waiting for calls that never came. Yet, even in her pain, she never spoke with anger. She wrote with patience, with love, and with a quiet hope that one day he would come back to her. Reading her thoughts broke something open inside Victor. He realized that redemption did not begin with grand gestures but with accepting the full weight of his mistakes. For the first time, Victor stopped justifying his choices. He no longer told himself that his actions were necessary or unavoidable. He began to see the damage he had caused, not only to Grace but to countless others who had suffered because of his rise to power. This realization pushed him toward a decision he had avoided his entire life: accountability. He turned himself in, offering full cooperation, confessing crimes he had once considered proof of strength. The men around him were shocked, unable to understand why someone with so much influence would choose punishment over escape. Victor understood something they did not: freedom without peace was another kind of prison. Prison stripped Victor of everything that once defined him. There were no suits, no guards, no fear in the eyes of others. He was just another man, forced to sit with his thoughts and his guilt. At first, the weight of regret felt unbearable, but slowly, it transformed. He began helping other inmates, listening to their stories, offering guidance where he could. In their broken lives, he saw reflections of his own choices and the consequences that followed. Each small act of kindness felt like a step toward something he could not undo but could still honor. Years passed, and though Grace never returned, her presence remained with him in a different way. Victor learned that redemption was not about erasing the past but about changing the future. When he was finally released, he walked out with nothing but the lessons carved into his soul. He used what remained of his resources to build something meaningful, dedicating his life to protecting what he once ignored. Victor Romano, the man who thought he controlled everything, finally understood that true redemption begins when a person accepts loss, chooses responsibility, and lives in a way that honors the love they failed to protect. When Victor Romano stepped back into the world as a free man, he no longer recognized himself in mirrors or memories. The sharp confidence that once defined him had softened into something quieter and heavier, shaped by years of regret and reflection. Freedom did not feel like relief, it felt like responsibility. Every street he walked reminded him of a past life he could never return to, and every ringing phone, even from strangers, made his heart pause. Grace's absence was no longer a wound that bled openly, but it remained a constant presence, guiding his choices in ways power never had. Victor did not try to rebuild his old empire. Instead, he dismantled what remained of it, selling assets and closing operations that once fed his pride. With the money, he created a foundation in Grace's name, focused on helping families broken by neglect, crime, and absence. He funded emergency response centers, supported women living alone, and ensured that no one under his care would ever be left unheard in a moment of need. These actions did not erase his past, but they gave it meaning. Each life he helped felt like a quiet apology spoken into the space where Grace's voice once lived. As time passed, Victor began speaking publicly, not as a leader to be feared, but as a man who had failed and learned too late. He stood in front of audiences without guards or titles, sharing his story with honesty that surprised even himself. He spoke about love not as a feeling, but as a responsibility that requires attention, presence, and sacrifice. He told them how easy it is to believe there will always be another chance, and how dangerous that belief can be. People listened not because of who he once was, but because of the truth he carried. In quieter moments, Victor visited Grace's grave, sitting beside it without rushing, without words that needed to be heard. He spoke to her in his thoughts, telling her about the people he had helped, the lives that had changed, the lessons he carried forward because of her love. He understood now that moral warmth does not come from being forgiven by the past, but from protecting the future. Grace had loved him when he was nothing, and in losing her, he had finally learned what it meant to value love above all else. Victor's life never became perfect, but it became honest. He answered every call, no matter how small or inconvenient, knowing that presence itself can save lives. In this way, Grace's final call became more than a moment of regret, it became a lesson passed on through action and care. The man who once ignored love to chase control now lived to remind others that the simplest act, answering when someone reaches out, can be the most powerful choice a person ever makes.